Hello, everyone. I am going to go ahead and get started now. Thank you all for joining. Happy St. Patrick's Day. This is the first webinar I've ever given fully myself, so bear with me a little bit. And in this kind of odd time we're all in right now, I'm giving this webinar from my home. Where I have a dog and a few kids here with me, so please excuse any background noise you might hear through this webinar. I'll go through it. Hopefully everybody here has the ability to ask questions. If you go to that Q&A tab at the top of your screen, or maybe it's at the bottom of your screen for the participants, you can ask questions as you go and as we go along, and I will try to answer them. I'll probably end up just answering them in the course of the presentation. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for your interest in our grant programs. Today I'm going to talk about specifically our Preserve New York program. But first, I want to thank our program sponsors. The New York State Council on the Arts and the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation are our program partners for both Preserve New York and the Technical Assistance Grant Program. We've had additional support for technical assistance grants from the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. But for Preserve New York today, the Arts Council, NISCA, and the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation are critical funding partners. So thank you to them. And the Preservation League, if I were giving this presentation in person, I'd ask everyone to raise their hands to see how many people are familiar with the Preservation League of New York State, how many people are members. Hopefully everybody is, to help support the great work that we do. And here's a picture of oh, thank you, Cindy. Somebody just raised their hand virtually. If you're a member of the league, or if you've heard of the league, if you want to go ahead and hit that raise your hand button. Oh, thanks, Paul. It's great to see. It's great to see the online participation. Thanks. So we cover all 62 counties in New York State, and we're based in Albany, and that building is currently empty. But on most days, you'd find the 8 members of the Preservation League staff there in our 200-year-old headquarters. Policy and technical services at the Preservation League. Some of you have probably have spoken with Francis Stern, who has gone on to a great opportunity with the State Historic Preservation Office. So now you've got me. I've been with the league since 2007. Jana Rudler is our Southern Tier Field Services Consultant, and Christina Hingle is our Preservation Policy Manager. What does the Preservation League do? Well, we do a lot of things, and including collaborating with local colleagues. We provide technical services and educational outreach, giving workshops, not just about grants, but about historic preservation, Preservation Commission training, which is something that Christina does. More information about some technical issues like windows, window repair. We have a 7 to Save program, which we just announced our 2021 7 to Save list in early February. And those are our 7 most endangered properties list in New York State. But then we also make excellence awards, and we really love it when something goes from a 7 to Save and then later gets an excellence award. And we've had several of those projects, like the Eastman Dental Dispensary, which just recently won an Excellence in Preservation Award, but was on our very first 7 to Save list back in 1999. We do public policy research and initiatives. That's something that Christina and I work on, in addition to the grants and revolving loans, the Endangered Property Intervention Program. So today we're talking about our grants, and the Preservation League grants only cover consulting expenses. So we do not have funding typically available for capital projects. So our funds go to the planning of those capital projects. And while you're thinking about doing work on your building, you want to consider some things as you're approaching a project. How does it work? How does it fit in with your mission? Is this really the right time to have a fundraising campaign? Understand that grants alone are not going to cover the project cost, and hiring qualified professionals. So if you have an architect on your board or an engineer on your board and you're a nonprofit and you're looking at one of our funding categories like a building condition report or a historic structure report, it's great to have them on your building committee, but you're going to want to hire somebody outside the organization. That's really the best practice. So when you're thinking, and this is all about the site specific grants, the building condition reports, the structure reports, and the landscape reports. So when you're thinking about applying for one of those kinds of site specific grants from us through Preserve New York, think about the steps in planning a project. What is the building condition report going towards? What's the goal of the organization? Same with a historic structure report. How is this going to aid in the interpretation of the building, as well as give you a roadmap to a capital project? So typically the steps, the first thing you want to do if you have a building and you're assessing your capital needs is a condition assessment. So our building condition report category in Preserve New York can fund those condition assessments, but in a more holistic way. So the building condition report category in Preserve New York is about a full-scale building condition assessment. Then there's a historic structure, cultural landscape report, a capital, and then you want to prioritize your capital project. And either one or two will give you that capital project prioritization. Then you have your architect or engineer, you complete your plans and specifications, go to bid, do your project. And these building condition reports and historic structure reports and landscape reports are really valuable documents leading up to that capital project and finding funds for the implementation. As I mentioned before, we could not have these programs without our program partners and our partnership grants through NISCA, Technical Assistance Grant, and Preserve New York. These two grant programs wouldn't exist without the New York State Council on the Arts, but we've been very lucky to have additional partners through the Gardner Foundation and the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. Here are a couple of recently funded projects through each of these grants: the Uptown Theater in Utica, and this is the Kingsbridge neighborhood in the Bronx. Hopefully there's not too much glare as the sun comes out. The Technical Assistance Grant Program is for nonprofits and municipalities, and that's key. Both of these grant programs are specifically for nonprofits or municipalities. And for the site-specific grants, you have to own your building or have at least a 6-year lease. The TAG program can only fund reports on structures that are used for an arts or cultural purpose. So if it was a municipally owned courthouse that did nothing but hold trials or court cases, it would not qualify for the Technical Assistance Grant Program. The maximum award for the TAG program is $4,000, and we require a 20% cash match project up to $5,000. And here, the kinds of reports that we can fund. So the picture you see here, it's a church, the Angelica Grange Hall, that is owned by the town of Angelica, and we funded a specialized conservation study to help with the soundproofing of this building so that it could be used for performances and public meetings, and so that it could be, the sound could carry. Technical assistance grants can fund a variety of projects. The building condition survey, often because of the size of the TAG awards, that's more about a very specific part of the building. So maybe it's an assessment of your roof or your windows or your siding. We fund engineering and structural analyses, and those tend to be the most immediate engineering structural analysis need that then can go into a deeper report. Feasibility reuse study, handicapped accessibility study, our mechanical, electrical, plumbing analysis that often can include fire suppression, energy efficiency studies, and then that specialized conservation study when it's a particular issue. So it could be a paint analysis of historic stenciling or that soundproofing for the Angelica Grange. Here, this most recent tag round, we awarded $3,600 to the Greater Mohawk Valley Land Bank for a feasibility study of this property in Canajoharie, the Hogue House, which is a very important site in Montgomery County in the Mohawk Valley's African American history. Our Preserve New York grants is our longtime NISCA partnership. We've been partnering with NISCA since 1993 on the Preserve New York program. Again, it's for nonprofits and municipalities, and with the exception of religious institutions, school districts, and these exceptions apply for both TAG and Preserve New York. Religious institutions, school districts, and buildings property owned by New York State. Again, the applicant must own the building or have a long-term lease when it's a site-specific project. That doesn't apply for our cultural resource surveys, which we'll talk about in a minute. There's 4 specific project types. So what I say is, well, our technical assistance grants can fund a wider variety of consulting projects, but have a much tighter budget requirement. Preserve New York, it flips that, where we can only fund 4 specific project types, but our grant award amounts have much more flexibility. So our average award is about $7,500. They tend to range between 3 and 10. This last round, we did make a $20,000 grant award, but those are few and far between because our the amount of that we have to give versus our applications. Usually we have only about 50%. We can only meet 50% or less of the total requests for the program. I'm trying to adjust my camera so you can see me with a glare. And again, we require a 20% cash match. That 20% match, has to be cash towards the actual consulting project. That means that if your architect has a $20,000 budget, then you have to contribute at least $4,000 of cash towards the project, and you would ask us for 16, although that would be a very large request. So it does not include in kind. It has to be 20% contribution towards the project estimate from your consultant. So there's 4 kinds of project types. As I mentioned, the historic structure reports, the landscape reports, the building condition reports. Those are the 3 site-specific types of grants that we fund. And then cultural resource surveys, which I'll talk about in its own category. Building condition reports. This is a relatively new funding category for us. It is one of our most popular funding categories. It is that comprehensive condition analysis. So this is about the entire building. When our grant panel reviews the applications, they're going to look and see, is this a report on the entire building? So it is a holistic building condition report. It should be completed by an architect or an engineer. And very important to note that it does not include a feasibility study. That would be a TAG. And NISCA, these programs, TAG and Preserve New York, do not fund schematic design. We do not fund construction documents or plans and specifications. So it is critical that your consultant not specify in their scope of services that they're doing schematic design work, plans and specifications, or construction documents. This is one of our smaller grants for a building condition report, but a great example of how an organization, in this case the Visual Studies Workshop, used our grant program to augment an earlier building condition report that was completed for this building by Barrow Architecture in Rochester. And they needed that to be updated, and they had been doing work on the building bit by bit, but wanted that overall comprehensive condition report update so that they knew what the next steps needed to be taken. Historic structure reports, again, we have here, it does not include feasibility study or schematic design work or construction documents or plans and specifications. Again, that's key. It is noted in the guidelines. But it makes us sad when we cannot consider or applications that include this. They're just unlikely to get funded because we cannot fund that kind of project in Preserve New York or feasibility studies for TAG, but never schematic designs. The thing about historic structure reports is the building condition report is basically a big chapter of a historic structure report, which then has a soup to nuts history of a building. So it will go through the construction chronology. It'll give a documentary history of the residents. It can include paint analysis. It is really a very thorough document that is most useful for buildings that are interpreted. So it should be completed by an architect, or it could be done in partnership with a preservation consultant. But say you have a library, unless you really want to delve into the history of the evolution of the building and understand it, that might not be a best candidate for a historic structure report. That may be more of a building condition report. And a historic structure report might be more appropriate to a historic site that is trying to decide how they want to interpret the interior and what the building chronology is. There are always exceptions to that rule, and sometimes there's a building where the stewards of that building really want to understand its evolution so that they can figure out the capital projects. But by and large, this is a much more expensive document than the building condition report, and so tends to be reserved for those buildings. Here's a great example of one. This is in Martinsburg in Lewis County, the Lewis County Historical Society, where Crawford and Stearns is undertaking a historic structure report of this building to understand the construction chronology and to guide interpretation. So they've made some of the most initial immediate repairs needed to the building that was acquired in 2005 by the Historical Society, and now they're working towards an interpretive plan. Cultural landscape reports, it's like a historic structure report, but for a landscape. So it includes that condition analysis, but also the historic significance and the evolution of that landscape. So cultural landscape reports should really be completed by a landscape architect. The Seward House Museum in Auburn received funding through Preserve New York for a cultural landscape report of its grounds and gardens, and this was to do an assessment and also to document the evolution of the grounds. This last round, we also funded a landscape report of cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery in Owego in Tioga County. A lot of cemeteries fall into this cultural landscape report category, especially Victorian cemeteries that were designed as a landscape for the public to appreciate. Cultural resource surveys. This is our broadest funding type, and it can mean there's several different types of cultural resource surveys. It's typically an inventory of historic resources, either within a neighborhood or a municipality, or it can be a particular type of historic resource. So Lestron homes is one of them, or farmsteads we funded. There are multiple levels of cultural resource surveys, and there's the reconnaissance level, which is the baseline document that you might want. So if you have a large neighborhood or a village and you want to have an assessment, could we have a historic district here? Are there multiple possible historic districts? Then the reconnaissance level cultural resource survey is the is the best way to approach that. And that's something that the State Preservation Office is going to want to see. Oftentimes, a municipality or a nonprofit sponsoring survey work will go from the reconnaissance level survey, which will then produce a document that hopefully outlines possible historic districts, to that state and national register nomination. But sometimes there is a more intensive level survey. Sometimes there's already background work done, but you need to do some of that intensive survey in order to assess whether you have that potential national register historic district. Or perhaps it's a survey of a particular building type. So if it's a survey of historic bridges, that might be an intensive level survey. It maybe can lead towards a multiple property documentation form, which is a different type of National Register document. So Kathy Howe with the State Historic Preservation Office is the coordinator for this unit, and she is the best resource for talking about, she and her staff, talking about how you might want to approach what level of survey you want to take. In addition to the state and national register nomination form, there's also local district designation. So surveys that reconnaissance or intensive level survey, maybe it's not for a national register nomination, maybe it's a municipality that wants to move forward on some local historic districts or to assess whether they even have possible local districts. Or maybe they're using it for a comprehensive planning tool. So there's both, there's multiple layers to use for the cultural resource surveys. Here's a great spotlight of an organization, the Jamestown Renaissance Corporation. Oh, I see 2 hands raised. Let me see. I see the hands raised, but I don't know what to. I can't do anything with that. If you have a question, those who raise their hands, see if you can type that question in, and let's see, and I'll see if I can answer it. Oh, it looks like it's, sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. So the Jamestown Renaissance Corporation has received several Preserve New York grants from us. Funding for National Register nomination of a historic district in the Lakeview neighborhood. Then in 2018, we funded an intensive level survey of Forest Heights. So that's a great example of where they knew they had a historic district, but they needed to do a little more work before they could really move forward for a National Register nomination. But then last year we did fund that National Register nomination. And so often historic districts cost, depending on their size, all told, that Forest Heights historic district was almost $15,000, which is about right. So sometimes if you spend more on the intensive level survey, you might spend less on the National Register nomination. If you don't have that background information, it might cost more for that National Register nomination. Why should people be listed on the National Register? So it's not, and again, here's where I would ask for a show of hands of people who understand the difference between local designation and national register designation. Thank you. Lots of people here know the difference. Thank you for raising your hands. So designation on the National Register, it doesn't mean that Washington slept there and that it's nationally significant necessarily. It can, but it's historic, cultural, and architectural significance at the local, state, and national level. So the vast majority of National Register historic districts are significant at the local level. And it doesn't necessarily mean that these are architecturally high style buildings in a neighborhood. It can be historic or cultural significance. So it doesn't have to have been buildings that were designed by an architect. It can be a community that was created that has extraordinary significance relating to the history of a local place, or of our state, or of our country. It's something that the State Preservation Office coordinates with the National Park Service. There are individual and district designations. Preserve New York really doesn't fund individual listings on the National Register. That wouldn't really count as a survey because it's focused on a particular building. So a lot of times if somebody is interested in funding for an individual National Register designation, we might suggest perhaps that would be a candidate for a cultural landscape report or historic structure report, which would give that organization or municipality all the background information it needs to then move forward with a National Register nomination, and could even be part of that report, but it would have to be a more intensive report. National and State Register of Historic Places is not equal to local landmarking. In historic preservation, regulation happens at the local level. So municipalities can decide for themselves how they wish to regulate buildings if they want to create a local landmark commission or preservation ordinance. State and National Register criteria. There are 4 criteria, A, B, C, and D, and it's either associated with events, historic events, with particular people, particular architectural characteristics, or that 4th one, that yielding information important to history and prehistory, that we tend to think of that as the archaeological category. What does designation mean for property owners? Well, there's a lot of benefits for National Register designation, and the biggest one, and the reason why we see the vast majority of National Register nomination applications or Cultural Resource Survey applications to Preserve New York is for eligibility for the historic tax credits. Here in New York State, we have a state historic tax credit. There is a 20% federal historic tax credit for income producing property. Eligible census tracts can qualify for the state historic tax credit that piggybacks on the federal, another 20% credit for income producing property. So that if you, for example, maybe own a mixed use building with a commercial storefront and apartments on the upper floors, and you need to do a thorough rehabilitation project on that building, it's in a qualifying census tract and it's on the National Register, you could apply for both the state and federal historic tax credits, which would be up to 40% of the qualified rehabilitation expenditures. There is also a state historic homeowner tax credit. That's for owner-occupied residences. Again, you have to be in a qualifying census tract or in a city outside of New York City with at least a 50% poverty rate. And you can check the census tracts. I put the link in there on the State Preservation Office website. This image that you're looking at shows the distinction between the qualifying census tracts and the not qualifying census tracts. So in the city of Ithaca, everything you see that's orange is a qualifying census tract, and then when you see the unshaded, where it's lighter, those are the census tracts that do not qualify for the state historic tax credit program. That historic homeowner credit is, again, it's a 20% credit off of qualified rehabilitation costs for your historic home. You have to spend at least $5,000 and you have to spend at least 5% on the exterior. So that can mean putting in storm windows, replacing your boiler, redoing your kitchen, repairing your plaster, fixing your siding, repairing your porch, fixing your foundation. There's a wide variety of projects, and we kind of talk about it where if you could pick up your building and turn it upside down and shake it, whatever doesn't fall out can qualify for the historic tax credit programs, both the income producing and the historic homeowner. The historic homeowner credit is a great program. It's not the kind of thing where you really should need to hire a consultant to walk you through it. It's very user-friendly, and the State Preservation Office is very helpful for that. And those of you who know and have talked to Frances Stern, she's now there working in their historic homeowner tax credit program. So you can call and talk to her. And you all know how helpful she is. So that's an example of the kind of help you'll probably get from the State Preservation Office. There's also grant opportunities for nonprofits and municipalities for buildings that are listed on the National Register. There's the Environmental Protection Fund grant. That's through the state REDC process, the Consolidated Funding Application. for historic religious structures. There is the New York Landmarks Conservancy Sacred Sites Program. So the details of how you apply for a grant from the Preservation League. This year we have a new process where we have a part 1 of the application form that's available on our website. Instead of needing to call us, as we've traditionally asked applicants to do, you can go, you have to go to our website, fill out the application form, and then we'll be in touch to ask you any questions about your project and provide you with the part 2 of the application. Those who've submitted applications before, part 2 is pretty much the same application you've known and worked with for many years. Part 1 is baseline information, and it's going to ask for questions like project contact and budget. In the part 1, which is on our website, you don't need an exact budget. If you've got one, that's great, but you can estimate. It's just so that we have a sense of, is this project on the right track? If you ask us for $50,000 for a $100,000 project budget, we might respond that this might not be the right program, or ask you a question, a more probing question about, how are you calculating that budget? The project contact on that part 1 should be whoever is the best person for us to talk to about the grant application. So if you're a municipality and you're the city planner and you're applying on behalf of the city, you should put yourself as the project contact. When you get to part 2, which is the longer application form, and that's that part 2, which is due April 6th, then that's where you might put the mayor as the official contact, being the person who needs to sign the grant documents. And that's key. I realize that we've already moved the application deadline once, and so it was not on the front page of our Preserve New York slide, but they are due April 6th, and there's information at the end of this presentation on that. But for those who didn't know, it's part 2 of the application that's due April 6th. You're going to want to contact your consultant and explain your project, ask for a proposal and a scope of work. We'll have time, hopefully we'll definitely have time at the end of this for question and answer. Those who don't have their consultant proposal and scope of work right now, it's probably going to be hard to get that, given what's going on and the need for social distancing right now before April 6th. So I'd like to have an opportunity to talk to everybody on this webinar a little bit about that. Go over your application checklist very carefully. Follow the instructions. There's now grant application instructions, which outline very specifically what we're looking for in every single question on our application form. Follow those. It's very useful. We are trying to make our application as clear and transparent as possible. Everything has to be submitted on time. If you're missing something after the deadline, you cannot submit it to us for consideration by our grant panel. So I would recommend that everybody be ready to go and have all of your documents, go over that application checklist, make sure everything is attached in that email. We cannot go back and ask you for something that you're missing. We are a state grant partnership, and that's one of our rules. How are our grants evaluated? There's our grant panel, me with much shorter hair, in our Preservation League headquarters. We convene a panel of experts, independent experts from around the state. We usually have a museum professional, an architect, a landscape professional, somebody in the arts, somebody from our historic preservation community, and they are the ones who review and score our applications. There are 3 evaluation criteria which we model on the criteria that the New York State Council of the Arts uses. That's historic preservation excellence and project quality, fiscal and managerial competence, and service to the public. Preservation excellence and project quality is your consultant, the right consultant for the project. If you are needing a building condition report because you have some structural concerns and you hire an architectural historian. Is that the best consultant to address the structural needs, or would you be better off with a structural engineer? Is this the right project for your building? Is this, if you're doing a building condition, if you apply for a building condition report and you really need guidance on interpretation, or you're applying for a historic structure report, but you have a lot of building repair and restoration needs and not really a clear plan on how to start and not really the funding for what everything that an HSR is, then is this the right project? Fiscal and managerial competence is, do you have a balanced budget? Is your board of directors separate? Do they follow best practices? Are they separate from paid staff? For example, is your board of directors made up exclusively of family members who then hire their son as a $100,000 a year executive director? That might not be the best, best practices in terms of nonprofit management. This is, again, this is where we look at is your budget balanced? If you're missing something in your application form, this is where you'll probably lose points, because part of fiscal managerial competence is knowing how to fill out an application form for a grant. Then service to the public. How is your building open to the community? How is it used? If the building is vacant, we are happy to look at applications, and many of our applications for building condition reports are for buildings that have an intended use, but they need to get through the stage in order to have their use. So what is the intended service to the public? If it's a cultural resource survey, does it have support? If the application is coming from the municipality, does it have support of the neighborhood association? If it's coming from a nonprofit, does it have the support of the municipality and the neighborhood association? That sort of thing. Some tips and some tricks for applying for a grant. Again, read all the directions and all the forms. Read the application, read the guidelines, read the instructions. We say this a lot because we still, it really breaks our hearts to see fabulous projects that don't get funded because the application's incomplete or the instructions are not followed. This is where, for example, that issue with schematic designs, you cannot include schematic designs or construction documents in your scope of services if it is a site-specific project. Pay attention to your budget. I put up here a sample nonprofit budget where you have your revenue, and it's really good to break down your revenue into different categories, and then you have your expenses. Again, great to see different categories. Ideally, those balance out. Then you might have, so this is one for a current year. What we would also want to see is your last year's budget, and this is in our application instructions. But there should be, where it says year to date, we would really want to see an approved and actual budget for your last completed fiscal year. And hopefully you don't ever end up with $114,000 surplus or deficit. So minor surpluses and deficits of small percents of your budget are understandable. When they start to be large, then that's either really important to explain in your application narrative, because that's, again, where there's going to be questions on the fiscal and managerial competence. Again, your project budget. So this is the organizational budget, which we have to have, and we also have to have a project budget. These are two separate budgets, two different budgets. Organization and project. The project budget should show the tasks, the deliverables, and the totals. It's really helpful if you can have a breakdown on a total per task. Sometimes if a consultant includes an ineligible expense, if they put the cost of that ineligible expense, then that might give the panel more flexibility in deciding to award a grant, but excluding that ineligible cost. So if it's a $20,000 proposal from a consultant, but they say that $5,000 is schematic design, then the panel would only consider funding $15,000. Again, it would be less competitive because it includes schematic designs, which are clearly stated as not being fundable in our application documents. So the project budget is the amount of money the consultant will be paid to complete the report or the survey. This is not how much will all the work that you have to do on your building cost. This is specific to this project that you're seeking to fund. It does not include capital expenses. Images. This year, we unfortunately are not going to be able to, even before coronavirus, we were not going to be able to visit sites. So images are even more important right now. 10 images are the most that we can accept. Please send 10. This is our only opportunity to see your project and your building and your neighborhood. And even if it seems to you that, of course, everybody knows what your building, landscape, cemetery, community look like, they don't, and they're not going to. So please send images. One of those images should be an overall picture of your place, of your building, of your bridge, of your landscape, of your neighborhood. Send us a streetscape of your neighborhood. If you have a variety of types of buildings, send us that variety. Technical assistance grants, we ask for 5. And you can see in our helpful hint, it's really important to know that your images communicate many things, including the need for the project, the importance of this project, and the significance of your place. These are both images that we have received from applicants. That one on the right of that outlet, it does demonstrate that they needed an electrical upgrade, but the panel had no idea what the building looked like. So again, please consider that you're taking us on a virtual tour of your place, and we think that you can do that in 10 images. Call us or email us if you have any questions. Shelley Carr is the League's executive assistant, and she has been doing a fabulous job helping in Francis's absence. And so this is Shelley's extension here, and you can email the grants at preservenys.org. Shelley is who you'll be communicating with if you submit that part 1. And but you can also always reach out to me. And I just realized I did not put my cell phone number on there. I'll give that at the end. Finally, so you can ask questions. You can ask questions from now through until April 6th. Don't hesitate to ask questions. This is different from the NISCA application, perhaps, but you can ask us questions about anything. We are not going to review your application for you, but you can certainly call and ask questions. Again, check your checklist before you submit. You're going to lose points if you are missing a supplemental material. These are some of the other funding sources. I've already mentioned a bunch of them. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has consulting grants, which often end up matching our funds, our Preserve New York funds. One of what's not up here, I'm realizing, is the Hudson River Valley Greenway and National Heritage Area. For applications that are in the National Heritage Area, the Hudson River Valley Greenway often matches or contributes towards a project. So reach out to them, reach out to Scott Keller at the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area, feel free to contact me after this if you want more information. They usually publish their grant information if you get on their newsletter or on their website. Our deadline is April 6th. April 6th is the deadline for part 2. You have to submit part 1 first. We don't have a part 1 deadline because we want to give everybody the most opportunity possible to to inquire about our grants, but we'll know if you submit Part 1 on April 6th, and we'll try to get back to you to get you that Part 2, but please don't wait to submit your Part 1 if you are interested in a grant. It's not going to bind you to submitting a Part 2. And again, you don't have to have your exact budget numbers. So Shelley is going to be your first point of contact with the league. I am always here for a resource, and right now, my phone number, the best way to reach me is my cell phone, which is 518-894-5314. And Shelley's number is 518-462-5658, extension 13. But we are going to ask you, if you have not submitted a Part 1, to please first do so. So please go to our website, which is preservenys.org. And right up at the top, there's a banner, and click on that, and it'll take you to the page that has the link for our Part 1. So submit that, and then we can talk to you more about your application. That's it for me. Are there any questions? Looks like we've lost a few people. Anybody here have any questions? No questions? Any questions at all? Oh, I see people have raised their hand. So I don't know how to call on people. If you have a question, is there a Q&A button? If you want to hit that Q&A button, which I think should be down there. I did a trial run on this earlier. Oh, here we go. How much money is available to award this year? So we don't have an exact number, because we have the funds roll into our technical assistance grants. But I will give you a rough idea, because our funding from both the Gardner Foundation and from the New York State Council on the Arts both cover Preserve New York and technical assistance grants. We're estimating we're going to have about $270,000 in grant funding through Preserve New York. Did everybody hear that? Can you raise hands if you can hear me? I haven't done this question and answer. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, then the next question, do you give a certain number of each type of grant? For example, are there only so many of the building condition reports that are given each year? No, we don't only give a certain number of each type of grant. We do like to fund in each category, and I'll tell you that our two most popular application types are building condition reports and cultural resource surveys. That said, the historic structure and landscape reports, you really do need to demonstrate that you need that type of an intensive level report in order to be competitive for funding of those types. But we will not fund only so many of any one type of report, but those condition reports and surveys are the most competitive. Afterwards are announced, what is the disbursement schedule? This is not a reimbursement program. So once we've awarded a grant, we'll send you a contract. It's a letter that you countersign and send back to us. Once we receive that, along with a copy of your contract with the consultant. So when if you're working with an architect or an engineer or a preservation consultant, we want to see a copy of your contract with that consultant so that we know that you're legally obligated to do that project. Then we'll send you our check. So you'll get that up front. At the end of the project, we require a hard copy of whatever report is produced. Condition report for a significant building owned by a fraternal organization, it has to be a 501c3. So when we say nonprofit, it has to be a 501c3. We have awarded grants to, there's a Masonic Lodge in Aurora, New York that received funding from us, but they created a separate 501c3 steward that had ownership of the building, and they had a first floor space that was open to the public. So it has to be a 501c3. Municipalities, so a question, can municipalities submit more than one grant if there are multiple projects? You're only going to get one grant. So if you're a municipality or nonprofit, we're only going to award you once. You technically can submit more than one application, but it's not going to be as competitive. We want to see that you're really making a that you're prioritizing your projects and that you're submitting to us for something that is a priority project. So if you have multiple applications in, there's going to be a question about what your priorities are. Can I go back to the organization budget slide? What documentation do you need? Oh, for municipality budgets. Yeah, I'll go back to that slide. But municipal budgets, we don't want your whole municipal budget. Please don't give us your whole municipal budget. What we'd like to see is your planning budget, or if it's a library, your library budget. If it's a historical society, I'm trying to think of all the different iterations of municipal budgets that we end up with. If it's a historical society that's funded through the municipality, we want to see that budget. So we want to see the budget of the department of the municipality that is seeking the grant. So planning budget's usually the one that we're looking for, but if you can reduce it to a page, that's great. We tend to be less worried about municipal budgets, but we want to see that there is money going to historic preservation. Do I have a list of consultants that we've worked with before that we can share? We sure do. And you can email us at that grants at preservenys.org and ask for that list, and we can send it your way. Our consultant list only includes consultants who have successfully completed projects that we funded through our grant programs. It is not a recommended list in terms of people come to us and say, can you put me on a list? We can't do that. It is, they're the consultants who have come to us who have successfully completed our grant funded programs, which I guess means they're pretty good. But I stress that we really like to add to that list. We love it when we can put more people on it. So if you're working with a consultant who is not on our list, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't work with them. What is important is that they are qualified. And when I went to that that historic preservation and project excellence category in terms of what the panel looks at, they're going to look to see what the consultant qualifications are. And it's really important that they've had experience with whatever project type you're doing. If it's a National Register nomination, they should have National Register nomination experience. If it's a historic structure report, same thing. Landscape report, same thing. There's a lot of landscape architects, for example, that do a lot of new landscape work and might not have experience with historic landscapes or cultural landscapes. All right, I think those are all. I don't have any more questions. I'm going to dismiss these. I don't know if everybody can see the questions as they've come up, so that's why I've tried to read them out loud. It is just about 2 o'clock. We're getting in just under an hour, which is great. Oh, here we go. With the current distancing. Oh, I'm glad. Thank you, Cindy, for asking this question. With the current distancing, if we do not have a consultant, can consultants give quotes by FaceTime or video? I sure hope so. We've gotten 2 inquiries in the last 2 days about whether we're going to adjust our grant deadline given the coronavirus situation, COVID-19 situation. I'm not inclined to do so because we just don't know. So I guess I would say if you don't have a consultant, if they'd be willing to give a video quote, that would really be on a consultant by consultant basis. I had an inquiry earlier today from a municipality where they had to have a public meeting in order to get approval to submit a grant application. That's something that's much harder to do. And my hesitancy on changing the deadline at this point is that we don't know how much longer we're going to be in this situation. So I don't want to move a deadline to May or June and have that not actually be helpful in getting the information everybody needs. So hopefully, because this all just started, hopefully most people have their consultant on board already, and hopefully consultants are willing to have some flexibility in how they're doing their estimates. And I'm going to talk to the New York State Council on the Arts to see what they think about how we can approach things like these estimates from consultants, given that site visits are no longer possible for the time being. The other reason I don't want to delay the deadline is when we're on the other side of this, I want everybody to be able to, pick right back up where we left off and be off and running with your project, so that consultants don't delay getting paid, so organizations don't delay. I don't know what's going to happen with the state's consolidated funding application, which usually comes out in May with a bunch of public meetings and then is due in late July. But we try to time our grants so that people know if they've got a grant from us before the consolidated funding application deadline. And so I hope that answered your question. I just got another question of whether copies of my slides will be available, and they are. This is an adaptation of a presentation that Francis gave at the end of January. That presentation is on our website. I'm recording this one, so we can probably put that up on our website too. And we can put the PowerPoint up on our website as well as a PDF, or happy to email it out. Any other questions? Thank you. Paul said thank you. Thank you to everybody. It's great that 18 of you joined today, and I guess 17 of you. I'm one of those, and I really am so glad that that we had anybody participate. So thank you for signing in. This is a new territory for us, one that we started even before we were all working remotely, but I probably in the next couple of weeks will get much more facile with webinars and computer meetings and all that kind of thing. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, and be well, everyone, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Thanks. Bye.